Okay, I don't know how long webcast this will be, but well, really, I'm getting pretty tired. I'll be going to bed pretty soon, but I felt it was very important, having just recently noticed a little link there about something about Common Core. Common Core, at least in some areas, is teaching, at least in one California district, is teaching that the Holocaust was being used as a propaganda tool. Yeah, Holocaust. So, I don't know where they're getting this other than maybe they have a hidden agenda, but it reflects the kind of mentality that is in itself really the actual propaganda. This attempt to have their own facts, just like they do on Benghazi, this revisionist, take on things. They don't want to look at the actual facts, the actual data, anything inconvenient, they don't want to consider it. And I think it's part of the overall trend toward fascism in this country. And yes, we are headed towards something of a fascist system where any kind of dissent or opposition is being suppressed. Any indication of an alternative viewpoint is being censored under the guise of political correctness, which is the most fascist concept ever. People will say, well, that's fascism. That's a right-wing thing. Is it? Well, look what fascism actually does. It involves government control of the economy. Yes, fascists are not fascists. They do not wish to control the economy, regulate it, and plan it. They don't plan it quite the same way the communists do. The real difference between fascism and communism is basically nothing more than the name and the letterhead of a company. The fascists will allow company, in many cases, to keep technical ownership and to a certain extent some of the profits. But they're not running their own destiny. They're not controlling themselves. They sell out a certain degree of power in exchange for privileges and perks and special contracts and kickbacks and sweetheart deals. And if you look at what's happening with the construction industry, at least in terms of road construction, highway construction, interstate, why do you think, put it this way, why do you think that federal gasoline tax is 49 cents a gallon? 49 cents a gallon. It's not to build roads. It's to, one, discourage people from actually driving to a certain extent. That's social control. And the other is to give sweetheart deals and kickbacks. Because they know they're not going to completely do away with the driving, That's a sop to the environmental faction, but that's part of their whole little coalition of special interest and radicals and various people who have a common agenda in certain areas that can be, manipulated and held together. But they're using each other, even as they're sitting on all of us and trampling our rights. And that's part of fascism too. The fascists will double talk. They will tell one person one thing, and then they'll tell somebody else something else, and appear to be all things to all people. So that they try to fool all people at the same time until they can get the power. Hitler, Mussolini, they did the same thing, Mussolini had headlines screaming, make the rich pay, and then he'd meet with bankers and merchants and so forth. Hitler would scream about National Socialism and the evils of profit and speculation capital. Then he'd meet with financiers and captains of industry and so forth and tell them he's the only one that can protect them from communism. So you do have that element there. But fundamentally, just as a microcosm of the whole thing, the interstate system and the federal gasoline tax is large part, yes, about kickbacks. They have to pay for it somehow. They don't have the most efficient interstate system, not like we did 50 years ago, for example. You didn't have half these kickbacks to unions, kickbacks to contractors, and so forth. Yeah, they're lining pockets everywhere, and they're paying for it with this things like the stimulus and so forth. Paying for it through the tax, the federal gasoline tax. Think about what this actually does to ordinary people, who it hurts. If you notice the price of beef anytime lately, if you notice the price of medication, if you notice the price of produce, how expensive it can be, these things are affected by things like the federal gasoline tax, because it doesn't just tax you at the pump. It taxes the truckers who who transport these things, the companies who are using the truckers and hiring the truckers and so forth. And this gets added on to the price of the food. People don't realize just how much the cost of your food is essentially taxed indirectly. And people complain about local food and medicine taxes, but this is a tax on your food and medicine too. And it's taxed indirectly through the federal gasoline tax. So, and of course in California, well, I understand they have it even worse because they have the state gasoline tax, which is outrageous there. So, and as bad as it is here, I'm definitely glad I don't live in California. So that's just an example of the kind of combination of social engineering, and kickbacks, and sweetheart deals, and crony capitalism, which is not real capitalism. It's crony capitalism. It's corporatism. It's an incestuous relationship between business and government and unions all together, working together to control things to their mutual benefit. And that's at the root of fascism. It really is the corporate state, the corporate state model where you have them all supposedly working together, supposedly for the common good, but of course they're not. They're working for their own interest, and they're making deals that harm the general public. And then at the same time they benefit. Who was it? Adam Smith, I believe, that people of the same said that people of the same trade seldom meet, but it results in a conspiracy against the general public. And I think that really is true. Fundamentally, when you have that kind of arrangement, the little guy gets left out. He gets left out of the equation. He gets hurt. Anyone who's not involved in that arrangement, that partnership or whatever. In Japan, they had what's called the zaibatsu. And these are conglomerates, and they have sweetheart deals with the government and so forth. And I think that's a large part of where Japan's problems have come in. For a while they prospered, but now they've been starting to pay for it. Is the same kind of corporatism. And you see that to a certain extent in China, but they're managing it more effectively. And that's why they don't have the same problems, a lot of cases, as the United States. Some people say, well, China has state capitalism. Some people say China has a more laissez-faire system. I would say what they have is a more efficient, sometimes ruthlessly so, sometimes too ruthlessly so, perhaps. I would say whatever deals, who knows what kind of bribes they took or whatever, patronage and so forth. But they have a more efficient version of corporatism than the United States. That's all. They don't have any addition of or they don't have to make any deals or sops or concessions to the ideologues, the radicals who they use, and the radicals use them and so forth. People are always like, is Obama using Goldman Sachs, or is Goldman Sachs using Obama? Well, the answer is yes. That is to say, they're both using each other. There's no question of that. There's a quid pro quo expected in those situations. And that's why Goldman Sachs and Warren Buffett and so forth did support Obama and a lot of his agenda. And if you think of a lot of these regulations, you'll see that many of the regulations don't hurt the big businesses. They don't. They really don't fundamentally hurt them. They hurt small business. Look at Obamacare. Who does it hurt? Small and middle level businesses. A lot of these laws, they hurt fundamentally small to little businesses, to medium businesses. That's why certain smaller companies, like the ones that my mother works at, it's a medical billing agency. It's a really nice one, or at least it has been. I don't know what the situation is exactly. And we're not 100%. What I do know, I can't divulge. I won't, except to say they are being hurt by this economy, and they are being hurt by Obamacare and the regulations and so forth. That this is a fact. You cannot deny that the impact of such regulations, of such a regulatory environment, and such taxation and so forth, is by far harder on small business, disproportionately harder. So sure, though they can go out and say, these big businesses, sure, we're for regulation. Absolutely. It cuts out their competition. It knocks out their competitor. And so instead you have the market coming along and saying, okay, we present competition and we can do it better, we'll do it safer, we'll do it whatever, we have better ideas, we know how to do this. They knock out the competition, they knock out the little guy, they knock out small business, and they get a sweetheart deal with the government and contract with the government because such and such was married to such and such, and so forth. Look at Solyndra. He's supposedly an upstart company, but this is not even an upstart company. It's a fraud. It's a complete scam. These are not upstart companies. They're just complete scams in that case. And the management of Solyndra was directly tied through marriage to Department of Energy personnel. So when you have that kind of situation, you have fundamentally a false flag situation. You have straw man, as it were. They're presenting themselves as champions of regulation, of enlightened capitalism or whatever. But what they are really representing is knocking out their competition. Crony capitalism, that's all it is. And this is really fundamentally what Theodore Roosevelt advocated, is crony capitalism. People talking about it as a progressive. Well, if that's your idea for progress, you can take it. You can leave it. Or you can have it, or whatever. Because what it is, it's crony capitalism. Good trusts. And, of course, that's where he took issue with William Howard Taft. Because Taft didn't make any such favoritist, exceptions. He actually tried to take, their supposed ideas to their logical conclusion naively. And, of course, Teddy Roosevelt didn't like that. So you had crony capitalism. And the most fundamental example of crony capitalism is the Federal Reserve System. You have these private banks who are contracted with the federal government to have federal money deposited in them. And you have given them the power to print money. Technically, it's not money. It's the Federal Reserve note. And but it's technically basically an IOU, but it's essentially money. It's being used as legal tender because the legal tender statutes are requiring people to accept it as money. And of course, they don't like any competition. They don't like Bitcoin or anything like that that can represent a threat to their monopoly. They didn't like Ron Paul for sure because he wanted out of them and he wanted competition in currency. So you have this kind of mentality. It's very prominent, especially in the Keynesian side of things. Crony capitalism, the root of Keynesianism, root of crony capitalism are essentially the same thing. You have basically people who have a belief that if you just spend and make these little deals and benefit certain people, that everything will go right, and in time of a crisis you can basically subsidize certain industries that just happen to be your buddies, of course. Bail them out, as with TARP. And then this is somehow going to be good for the economy. Well, we saw what happened with the stimulus, didn't we? Did it go anywhere? Did it benefit the economy? So-called jobless recovery. Now, maybe I'm not a sophisticated economist, but let me put it this way. When you have a jobless recovery, it doesn't look very much like a recovery to the average person out here. If it is a recovery, technically it is, then it's fundamentally a useless recovery. A jobless recovery is a useless recovery. It benefits almost nobody except for the very top. And why do we have a jobless recovery? Why? I'll tell you why. Because we have crony capitalism. Because we have a fascist system. Because we have the Federal Reserve. Because we have quantitative easing. Because we have TARP. Because the government cannot leave well enough alone. It's like that little zit, and the more you pick at that zit, the worse it gets. You think you're helping with that zit, but you're actually making it worse. That pimple that just won't go away. And the federal government, when it does this, is analogous to the guy who can't stop scratching that zit, tearing it off. So you get a scab and so forth. And so you get that situation. They're supposedly helping, but they're not. It reminds me of the old principle of the Hippocratic Oath. The words, "First do no harm." The federal government has yet to learn that precept, which is pretty basically the Hippocratic Oath back when it was administered. My understanding is that people these days don't even administer it anymore half the time. Not as a requirement of medicine. First, do no harm, though. That's a pretty obvious concept, you would think. First, do no harm. But the federal government hasn't learned this. Or if they have learned it, they really don't get that they are doing harm. Which, really, after a while, at some point, you come back to the old, somewhat half-serious, tongue-in-cheek definition of insanity. Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. So, and that's what we've had, for the past century, 101 years now. We've had the Federal Reserve System, we've had the progressive movement, we've had its ideas, and nothing has worked. It has not worked. Not really, fundamentally. The Great Depression, which happened after the Federal Reserve was set up, that's in the face of anyone who claims that the Federal Reserve somehow stopped the boom and bust cycle. You have, the various recessions that have taken place, 1970s, stagflation, the early 90s, and so forth. You have all these problems that have emerged. You look at what happened in the 2008 situation. What happened? The bubble burst. Who created this bubble? The federal government created the bubble. How did they create it? Subprime mortgages. Even the president, which I had several issues with, the Republican president, which I thought was not nearly conservative enough on certain key issues, even he was smart enough to realize this is not going to work out. And he was warning them about this GSEs and subprime mortgages, and nobody was listening. Ron Paul was warning people long ahead of time, and he was right, and nobody listened. We had people like Barney Frank and Chris Dodd who had their fingers in the pie. They were benefiting from all this all. They denied it. They said, no, we don't have to worry about this. Don't have to worry about this. They were benefiting from it. Of course they said that. And then, of course, they accused anyone who disagreed with them of being racist and so forth. Why? Because they would say, well, this will all help the minorities. This was not about minorities. It was about money. It was about their money. They had kickbacks. They had deals. They had invested interest in this GSE subprime mortgage business. And what happened when the subprime mortgage bubble burst? The same people would then attack the free market and blame the free market and say we need more regulation. When it wasn't the free market that created this. It was an artificial government intervention in the market in the first place that created this bubble, and then naturally the bubble burst, and then they blamed the free market, which had nothing to do with it. Nothing at all. We don't have free market capitalism in this country. We have not had it for a good long time. Why? Because we've had Hamiltonians out there and people that would even put Hamilton to shame. We've had progressives, we've had crony capitalists, we've had people who basically think as an article of faith in this country that the government should subsidize business, that the government should run business and intervene with it and establish social goals which have absolutely nothing to do with what is actually an effective economic model. The marketplace is far more effective for curing social ills in many key areas. Now, I'm not an anarcho-capitalist, unlike some of my friends, but in several key areas, the marketplace has actually benefited people far more in key areas in terms of providing employment and so forth than the government does. And then, of course, you see things like the minimum wage hike and so forth. People actually want to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour in fast food. This is absolutely insane. Say goodbye to your son or your stepson or whatever having a job at McDonald's if they don't even have a high school diploma or GED or whatever. It's not happening. If they don't have a bachelor's degree at least, they're not going to have a job at McDonald's. You're going to need that just to get a job at McDonald's. To say nothing of a master's degree or whatever. Why? Because unskilled labor simply isn't worth $15 an hour. Plain and simple. There is no market value of $15 an hour at this current economy for unskilled labor. You have to, at entry level, accommodate the fact that this is unskilled labor. It does not have the same value as skilled labor. This is something that people seem to not understand in economics. What will happen? That people joke about the price will go up. Price may go up, but that's not the main thing that's going to happen. Massive unemployment. Massive layoffs. And forget about getting a job there if you don't have at least a bachelor's degree. It's not going to happen. So, where am I going with this? Where I'm going with this rant, as it were, if you want to call it a rant, is basically to say that we are heading towards a fascist system. That's where we've been, really, fundamentally. Not just headed towards, we're in there. Obamacare is a case in point. The health care mandate. I don't care who originally proposed it. It's still a fascist proposal, no matter who proposed it. Newt Gingrich or Heritage Foundation or whatever. The individual mandate is a fascist system. It's basically telling you, just for the privilege of living in this country, you have to buy insurance. It's not the same thing as buying car insurance, because you can avoid car insurance by not getting a car. You live in this country, though, you cannot avoid Obamacare and the healthcare mandate. So, this is another example of fascism. They want to control your speech. They want to tell you where you can put nativity scenes anymore. They want to control how much salt you have in your food. They didn't want to allow food aid in some cases to victims of Hurricane Sandy because they couldn't be sure of the salt content. Sorry, Mayor Bloomberg, but I think your priorities are out of whack here. Isn't it more important to get the food to them so they can eat, so they can be alive, so you can worry about their salt content? This is the same guy who was worried about such things back when they were dealing with blizzards. Excuse me, shouldn't you be more worried about rock salt, table salt at this point? You know, this is the kind of warped priorities. We get these ivory tower elitists who don't actually understand people. And if they do understand people, they have a personal agenda that basically is adverse to the interest of average people. And by average people, I mean people who are not part of the big three: big business, big government, big labor. Basically, people who are small businessmen, who are white-collar workers, or anyone who works in various different other areas. Rank-and-file labor, yes. Basically, though, they're not part of the labor leadership. They're not part of the captains of industry, and they're not part of government. And so you have a disconnect. You have this level of Americans, the governing class, and then you have the rest of us. And it's not. This is not caused by capitalism. It's caused by fascism, by corporatism. And in some levels, it leads to a sort of feudalism because you have the state basically telling you, okay, I can take a certain percentage of what you own and use it for myself and whatever needs I have. And just for the privilege of living in this country, you agree to allow me to tax you, and I can distribute it to whomever I want, including my buddies, and then give them their little fiefs or whatever. If you look at the income tax, this is a case in point. It's the same thing as what you have under the manorial system of feudalism. You have the state taking, or the feudal lord taking a certain percentage of your earnings, confiscating it from the very beginning, and therefore saying, this is how much I'm allowing you to keep. Don't think of it as me taking away, but me allowing you to keep this much. It's kind of exemplified in that one song, Taxman, by the Beatles, which it says, that famous line, if should 5% appear too small, be thankful I don't take it all. So you have that mentality. You have that system. And there's a reason why Hayek called it the road to serfdom. It is serfdom. It is putting the rest of us peons under their control, under their thumb, so that they can run our lives and pretend that we're a free country, while restricting our speech, while setting up certain groups as being on a watch list. Thanks a lot, Southern Poverty Law Center, by the way, for that. Huh? You've really been helping out with that. Anyone who disagrees with you and your rather twisted views, you label as a hate group. And of course you get a little sweetheart deal with the FBI. Yeah, I'm talking to you, Southern Poverty Law Center. Yeah, you guys. So, that's really fundamentally where I'm at this point. How did Zola say during the Dreyfus affair? Jacques, I accuse. That's the point I'm at this point. I accuse the Goldman Sachs people. I accuse Obama. I accuse the Federal Reserve System. I accuse the big labor, big business, big government. I accuse Mayor Bloomberg and several others of having a hand in this. Not just Common Core, it's a symptom of the problem. Not just Solyndra, it's a symptom of the problem. Not just the Benghazi thing, the people who are responsible for what happened in Benghazi, like Hillary Clinton. Blood is on your hands, Hillary Clinton. And you too, President Obama. The blood of the Benghazi Four. Not just those, but also the whole overall problem. TARP, the bailout, GM, which was really just nationalization temporarily so they could control it and put in their people, including representatives of guess who, the people who caused it, not the rank and file union people. We're talking about the leadership of the unions who want to pad things. Of course they want to raise the wages so that you won't notice that they're taking more in dues. It's in their best interest. They could have had somewhat the same wages and just not taken as much in dues, and then workers wouldn't have really been worse off. But the union leaders who wanted to give those dues to the Democratic Party, yeah. I challenge you, if you're a member of the AFL-CIO, to prove me wrong here. How much of your dues have gone to parties you may not agree with, candidates you may not agree with? They endorse people that you do not agree with. If you're a member of the United Mine Workers of America, for example, are you really being represented by your union? And this is why people in the private sector are leaving unions in droves. And that's why they depend so heavily in the union organizations on public sector unions. Why? Because the unions need the public sector unions and public employees unions in order to survive as a movement, because they are losing in the private sector, because they don't represent the workers anymore, and the workers are waking up to this fact. So, I mean, I'm not saying that there's not a place for unions within reason. There's a place for unions within reason. But the fact of the matter remains that the leadership of these unions needs to be ousted. They need to be replaced by people in the unions, by the rank and file people who actually represent the rank and file. And that's just an example. So you have that improper relationship, the unholy trinity of big government, big business, big labor, that has been in place for a while. And it has feasted off of this country, leeched off of this country for far too long. Well over 100 years. And so you have this problem, basically, of crony capitalism, of fascism, and things now getting to the point where they're wanting to deny the Holocaust in happening. Why? What is their agenda? Why do they not want to accept the Holocaust? Before, if anyone denied the Holocaust, they were labeled an extremist, a zealot, someone who denied reality, as being a bigot, an anti-Semite. And frankly, anyone who denies the Holocaust is those things. Because they are. They always have been, and they always will be. Anyone who denies the existence of the Holocaust has a serious problem, because the Holocaust did happen. It's a documented historical fact. They are not entitled to their own facts. What is the point of all this then? Israel. Israel is now the enemy of this administration. This administration, which is a fascist, anti-Semitic, anti-Zionist administration, which hates Netanyahu, which hates Israel. And if you doubt me, think about it. Which hates the ranchers, hates the states, and wants to grab more land. This administration is a fascist administration. And it's just one of many fascist administrations. And if you think the problem is going to be solved by a change of parties, you're deluding yourself. Last time around we had Mitt Romney, which was admittedly better than Barack Obama, but he was responsible for Romneycare. This is just the continuation, the worst example of the $17 trillion debt, much of which was added by Obama. Probably half of which was added by Obama. But fundamentally, this is a continuation of the problem, of the elephant that's in the room, of the forces that buy off both parties, control the leadership of both parties. We're not talking about the rank and file, Tea Party Republicans. Those guys, some of them are misguided in some cases, but a lot of them have good ideas in many cases and are trying to change things for the better. Libertarians certainly understand things very well. What are we talking about here? We are talking about the rhinos, the Lindsey Grahams, the John McCains, people like that. They sold out. They sold us out. If you're watching this John McCain, you know what I'm talking about. You know what you did. You know what you've been doing. Same thing with Lindsey Graham. You know what you've been up to. We know what you've been up to. Who you work for. Who you really work for. And it's not us. Not who you should work for, which is us. But who you really work for. And if you do not realize that you're in cahoots with the same people, or maybe you do realize, I hope you don't realize, and if you do realize, you'll wake up to this and change sides. You're in cahoots with the same people who are behind the Palestinian movement, behind Hamas, behind Hezbollah, behind the anti-Israel thing. Who is behind all this? Think about this. Who is behind this? George Soros. This is an example. He's a felon, by the way, in France. He's wanted by the French government. And if he ever sets foot on French soil anywhere, he will be arrested on the spot. Just you wait. My personal thing is if there was a way to extradite him back to France, I would highly recommend it. Highly recommend it. And frankly, if I were president, I would be looking into ways to extradite him back to France. He's a dangerous man, very dangerous. But he's by far only part of the equation. David Rockefeller, the Rockefeller Foundation, people like that. You look at who's behind a lot of the contributions to PBS. Now, PBS has plenty of good programs, but there are a lot of people behind a lot of that stuff. They're dangerous people. And they're behind Palestine. They support Palestine. They support Hamas. They support Al-Fatah, the main organization, the main group within PLO, or the former PLO. And the real difference between Hamas and Al-Fatah is only style and some dogmatic things here or there. But their goal remains the destruction of Israel. But who's behind all this? What is their goal? Now, I'm running the risk of sounding a lot like Alex Jones here. Now, the difference between Alex and Alex Jones is that he thinks that it's one vast one-world conspiracy, and that everything is tightly controlled by a central point, and this one central monolithic point controls everything. No. What we have here is instead a web of coinciding interests that are using each other, coalitions. They may seem very disparate, and they are disparate. They are in cahoots for now. And the moment that they have what they want, they will turn and rend each other to pieces. Why? Because the only thing they have in common is their mutual enemies, I should say, the West and Israel. They want to destroy the West, and they want to destroy Israel. Why? Without Israel and without the West, they can establish their Agenda 21 system, but each of them envisions themselves being at the top of this. Each of them envisions themselves being in control of this. They have a mutual agenda. They have a mutual interest. And to pursue this interest, they will try to strip away our freedoms, bit by bit, and at the same time they will try to destroy Israel. This is reality. This is who we're talking about here. Socialists, communists, globalists, Palestine, pro-Palestinian forces anyway, anti-Israel, anti-Zionist. This is why the United Nations approved an anti-Zionist resolution to equating Zionism with racism, which is considering that Zionism is the very basis for the existence of the State of Israel, is a particularly disturbing statement. It's basically saying that you're a racist unless you're an anti-Semite, which is completely bogus. But that's essentially what they're saying. And this has been in place for quite a while, for well over 30, 40 years. This resolution was put in place in the 70s. So you have this kind of mentality. You have these forces which all have a common interest. And like I said, the moment they get what they want, they will tear each other apart. But first they want to bring us down. When they bring us down, then they can attack each other. So you have militant Islam, you have socialists, you have communists, you have globalists, you have people, international finance. They really don't care for the radicals of the left, the Saul Alinskys and so forth. They're using them. They're using them to get what they want. They're using Van Jones and Barack Obama and people like that to get what they want. And the moment they don't need them anymore, the moment they cease to serve their purpose, they will ditch them, just like that. They will tear them apart. And if he becomes an obstacle to what they want, they will turn on him. So, yeah, this is where we're headed. Fascism. But fascism by means of a coalition of fascists, different types of fascists, which have a common agenda, but again, the moment they don't need each other, they will turn on each other. in order to gain the supreme power, because they don't want to share power. They're fascists. Fundamentally, they're statists, they're fascists, they don't want to share power. They want to get rid of each other. The environmental movement is the same way. The environmental movement, for example, does not want you to know that within the last year, the polar ice caps, which were supposed to be melting, have actually begun to thicken. Yes, thicken. Why have they thickened? Why are there more, in fact, polar ice? Was there more Arctic ice than there was before? Because the Earth is not warming anymore. It did for a while, but it isn't warming anymore. It's a cycle. It's not a man-made thing. It's a cycle. And of course they go after anyone who says that there is no such thing as man-made global warming. Well, hello. Sorry. How much effect do you really think man has on this global environment? How important do you really think we are? The gall, the arrogance to say that man can actually do this to that extent. We might have been making things a little worse, but it was part of the cycle, and it was going to turn around, and it did. But of course, they discredit anyone who disagrees with them and say that they are extremists, or deniers of reality, and so forth. And they're in the minority, or they're crazy, or whatever. Of course, they want to say that. They want to equate us with people who don't believe in the moon landing. Now, I happen to believe that the moon landing was very real. But I do not believe that man-made global warming is real. Because I've seen the evidence. The evidence tells me that it's actually reversing itself. This is not a man-made thing. This is a cycle. That's why they had the Little Ice Age at the beginning of the 19th century. That finally ended at the beginning of the 19th century. It was in place from the mid-14th century to the 19th century. This is a cycle. We're probably headed for another one of those little ice ages. If nothing else happens, if things go as the way they're going. So, and of course they don't even consider the Yellowstone supervolcano factor, which if it ever should erupt, which there are some been talk lately that it might erupt, that would totally change the issue of global warming, because the supervolcano result in severe wintry conditions and a lot of death, to say the least, famine and so forth. Concern whatever other problems we have as an economy, we are the breadbasket of the world. Even now, we feed the world, which is another thing here, by the way. Before I go, I want to point out ethanol subsidies. Corn ethanol subsidies is a major factor in world hunger. Why? Because instead of taking that corn, using it, selling it as food, they create artificial scarcity, something that's not even efficient as a means of alternative fuel. Create artificial scarcity so that they can increase the food prices for other countries. Make it harder for people to afford in various countries, including very poor countries in the third world and so forth, the price of food, the price of corn, for example, thus increasing famine and causing people to starve that would not perhaps starve, or at least be severely malnourished. So that is blood on their hands. But who are these people? Again, it's a conglomerate of interests. People with the, like I said, globalists, global finance, socialists, communists, anti-Zionists, militant Islam, as it were. You have these forces out there, and they have their agenda. And environmentalists are another example. And an example of what is really going on is showing, and radical feminists, by the way, is showing in, like, example, situation in Egypt where nobody wants to talk about the Coptic Christians. What is being done to the Coptic Christians. Persecution, the harassment, the murder, the pogroms against the Coptic Christians in Egypt. Absolutely disgusting, terrible, much on the same level as the Armenian and Assyrian genocides by the Turks. Nobody wants to talk about this. But they happened, and they're happening now. Before it was the Armenians and the Assyrians, now it's the Copts. Before, and at various points there have been persecutions of Jews, which is why so many Jews have left so many other countries and gone to Israel. So many Middle Eastern Jews have moved from Iraq, Iran, Turkey, Syria, Jordan, North Africa, and they have moved to Israel. Why? Because of persecution. And this is something that people don't want to talk about, but it is happening. It is happening now. It is happening in Egypt in particular. It is a vicious, horrible thing. And they are suffering it right now. And I would point out that the forces that were advocating the goals of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt when they were in power were advocating a tax that you would either have to convert or pay this tax or leave or die, essentially. It was a tax on Jews, a tax on Christians. Anyone basically who was not a Muslim, as they saw it, was to be taxed by this. Under their vision of Sharia law that they were going to impose on Egypt. Now, I'm not trying to say that the present government of Egypt is by any means ideal, but let's just not kid ourselves. Democracy in Egypt was not going to last very long under Mohammed Morsi, no matter how democratically elected he was. It was not going to last long. It was going to be a very short-lived proposition, and it was going to go the same way as Iran. And whatever faults the current government of Egypt has, it stopped that. It stopped that problem. Because they saw that this man had designs on being a dictator. And they stopped his dictatorship cold. Because it was going to be a dictatorship. And if you doubt this, just consider, it is not the goal of the Muslim Brotherhood to have a free republic. That is not their goal. That is not their vision for the world. Just as it's not the vision of Hamas for the world, or the vision of Hezbollah for the world. These people don't think in terms of democracy or freedom. It's like what Khomeini said, do not use democracy. This is a Western idiom, and we do not want it. They don't believe in that. They believe in Ummah. They believe in Sharia. They believe in a caliphate. This is what they want. This is their vision for the world. And this is why you have Holocaust denial. This is why you have Common Core advocating Holocaust denial. Taxpayer-funded Holocaust denial. This is serious. This is not a joke. I have talked about various other subjects. I've sung. I have gone on about other things. I'm talking about politics. I'm talking about life and death issues here. I have felt the need to speak because it is absolutely dangerous what's going on, and frightening what is going on. And if you aren't frightened, you don't know enough to be frightened, but you should be, because this is serious. This is no joke. Look for yourselves. I don't want you to take me at my word. I don't want you to. I want you to look at the facts. I want you to look at what's really going on, what the agenda is, and who is working for who. Ask yourself about Anthony Weiner's wife, what her connection is to Hillary Clinton, for example. Ask yourself about Benghazi. Ask yourself about Fast and Furious, about the Romanov Sestak business, about the election in 2010, the fraudulent election of Harry Reid, re-election of Harry Reid after the electrical blackout. Ask yourself about the fraudulent re-election of Barack Obama, and yes, it was a fraud. Ask yourself about all these rigged elections, the events of surrounding Hurricane Sandy. Look into this for yourself. Don't take me at my word. I don't want you to take me on board. That would imply gullibility, and you're expecting me to believe you to believe me. I don't want you to believe me. I want you to look at the facts for yourself. Look what's happening in Egypt. Look at Common Core. Look at the federal land grabs. Look at the attacks in Canada on the rights of the natives. Yes, the rights of the natives being attacked both in the United States and in Canada. Particularly in Canada because they are actually moving in on the Indian reserves. The First Nations. Moving in on them and denying them their rights under existing statutes, which are basically a form of apartheid in Canada. Yes, it does exist. The Indian Act, serious business, makes anything in the United States look tame by comparison. And the federal government, our federal government, is intervening there and making things worse. We're actually meddling in another country's internal affairs. Our Bureau of Land Management, our Department of Homeland Security, seizing land, denying people the right to own land under the Indian Act, taking advantage of it with the cooperation of the Canadian federal government. So this is despicable. This is completely despicable. And you people say, well, what about Cliven Bundy? He was a racist. So was Randy Weaver. David Koresh was a cult leader. But in this country we have inalienable rights, even for racists and even for cult leaders. We have the right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, and that even applies to racists and cult leaders. They're not exempt from these rights simply because their views are unpopular. Part of the whole point of the First Amendment is that you do have the right to unpopular views, and even very wrong-headed views. I disagree categorically with many of the things that David Duke espouses, but David Duke has his rights. Just as an example. He's wrong, but he has his rights. It's like what I saw one time in the Law and Order episode, and I found it rather interesting, at least when this issue, or the issue of race is concerned, and suppressing people who disagree with your, suppressing people who do not accept a more enlightened understanding of race. That is to say, suppressing racists, the ones who do not recognize the basic equality of all humanity. And I personally believe very strongly, all men are created equal. There is no exception. One race to the other. We are all equal in the sight of God. All created equal. Racism is despicable. But it's kind of like this quote that I heard in Law and Order, where he tells Jack McCoy is a bit of an overzealous prosecutor at one point. This judge tells him, it's not about being right. It's about doing right. It's not enough to be right. You have to do right. Now, one of the things I recommend you read, if you get the chance, something called Founding America. Founding America is a book that has the list of the documents, the founding documents of this country. A lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them. Is excerpts of Federalist Papers, Notes of the State of Virginia, which I've read part of. It has several of the ratification resolutions from the Constitution when it was ratified. It has a speech introducing the Bill of Rights written by James Madison, in which, by the way, he makes a rather interesting prophetic statement. Basically, I would encourage you to read it, basically saying that we need to watch out for the states suppressing the rights of the individual and protect the people from the states doing it the same thing, not just from the federal government, because the states can trample people's rights, and that's a dangerous thing too. My formula has always been people above the states and the states above the union, as to say that the states have more rights than the federal government and the people have more rights than the states. I would like to quote this part, and I think it's relevant. I wish also in revising the Constitution we may throw into that section which interdicts the abuse of certain powers in the state legislatures, some other provisions of equal or, if not greater importance, than those already made. The words that no state shall pass any bill of attainder, ex post facto, etc., law, etc., wise proper restrictions in the Constitution. I think there is more danger of those powers being abused by the state governments than by the government of the United States. The same may be said of other powers which they possess, if not controlled by the general principle that laws are unconstitutional which infringe the rights of the community. I should therefore wish to extend this interdiction, and add, as I have stated in the fifth resolution, that no state shall violate the equal right of conscience, freedom of the press, or trial by jury in criminal cases, because it is proper that every government should be disarmed of powers which trench upon these particular rights. I know in some of the state constitutions the power of the government is controlled by such a declaration, but others are not. I cannot see any reason against maintaining even a double security on those points, and nothing can give a more sincere proof of the attachment of those opposed to this Constitution to these great and important rights than to see them join in obtaining the security I have now proposed, because it must be admitted on all hands that the state governments are as liable to attack these invaluable privileges as the general government is, and therefore ought to be as cautiously guarded against. That's really, true. And he was very prophetic about that. And we do have state and local governments suppressing the rights of the individuals. And that, of course, was Madison in his speech given introducing the amendments that now constituting the Bill of Rights, not all of which were approved, by the way. One of which wasn't approved until the 1990s, affecting congressional pay raises. Believe it or not, that was originally part of the Bill of Rights and took that long to be approved. This was given on the floor of the United States House of Representatives on June 8th, 1789, by James Madison, when he was still in Congress. There's also minutes of the New York Ratification Convention, the statement, the resolution of the New York Ratification Convention, the resolution of the Virginia Ratification Convention, resolution of the Massachusetts Ratification Convention, which I find especially important, especially these words. The Congress erect no company of merchants with exclusive advantages of commerce. Now, if that had been added to the Constitution, that would have been a particularly benefit at this point, because the crony capitalism we have today would have been much more hampered by this, as it should have been. And so you have the situation here where we have crony capitalism, but if you had something like what was proposed here in the Massachusetts Ratification Convention on February 6, 1788, you would not have the Federal Reserve System as it exists today. You would not have a lot of these federal monopolies and sweetheart deals and kickbacks and all that. You would not have this crony capitalist system where the government gives special monopolies and privileges to certain companies and so forth. Because it would be prohibited, clearly, and they would have nipped it in the bud and they would have stopped it right there. And that would have prevented any of the financial interest in getting invested in this thing. People would not have had the financial interest or vested interest or motivation to do half the stuff they do. So, that's just an example of how important the minutes of the various, or not the minutes, statements of the various ratification conventions are, and why this book is a fascinating book. Truly, I would recommend it. I really would. Like I said, it's called Founding America, Documents from the Revolution to the Bill of Rights. Now, I know I've rambled a bit, and I've veered off topic a bit. Essentially, what I am saying is this. We are losing our freedom. And we are losing our country. And if we don't do something about it, this loss will be irrevocable. We have to act. This is critical. We are reaching critical mass here. We must, at some point, take a turn in the corner, the fork of the road we are, as it were. We are at a fork of the road. We are at a crisis. And as the Chinese would say, crisis, where crisis means both danger and opportunity. And we have a danger of falling apart, and a danger of becoming a tyranny. We also have an opportunity to remake our country, to start afresh, clean slate, start over, get rid of the debt, get rid of this system that we have today, that is crony capitalism, that is monopoly, that is not capitalism, but is pseudo-capitalism, as it were, at least not the true free market. We have a chance to build a new America. We have a chance to build an America where there really is equality of opportunity. Not a misguided attempt at equality of result, which nobody really believes will ever happen, or nobody in their right mind, except for the communists, and they're, well, by definition, they're not in their right mind, are they? Really, fundamentally, we have to build, protect, and maintain this country. This is all we got. There's no refuge from here. Where are we going to go? Switzerland, Korea, Taiwan. They have their own system, that's fine. But they can't accommodate millions of American refugees. Not millions of us. We have nowhere to go. We have to stand and fight for this country. This is our country. We have to preserve it. We have to act. This is why I'm still up at almost 4 o'clock in the morning. Because this is what keeps it. This is the sort of thing that keeps me up at night. The future of our country. The worry that I have for this country. We are headed down the dark road of tyranny. That we are headed for a police state that they are trying to make for us. And we have to stop it. It's not a matter of nipping it in the bud. It's gone far beyond that point. We have to cut off the head of this tyranny. We have to stop it. We have to cut off the head and then burn the body. We cannot allow this to continue. We don't have much time left. We have to act. We have to hold those responsible accountable. We have to demand answers. We have to demand our country back. We have to take it back. Because they're not going to give it back to us. We're going to have to take it back. Hopefully we can take it back by means of the ballot box. I really do hope that. What I would like to see is a congressional supermajority that can override the tyrannical policies of this administration, override all his vetoes, and enact legislation that would basically strip him of any means of tyrannizing over this country. I don't know if it would get to that point, but that would be the ideal situation under the present circumstances. It has only happened once. A congressional supermajority so large that such an obvious expression of the popular will, that the popular sovereignty, that the president was powerless against it. In the past, that was a damaging thing because it was misapplied. But in this case, I think if done right, we can have a revolution at the ballot box. And I might add, we can get rid of this guy. It's a simple matter of impeachment. Kick him out. Remove him. Biden will be toothless. Obama removed, impeached, and convicted like he should be. Thrown out of office. We can have a revolution without blood, without guns, without smoke. Just a revolution at the ballot box. But there isn't the danger of voter fraud. So this has to be so massive, so complete, that no amount of voter fraud could overcome it. That is what I'm urging. I'm urging the American people to vote these guys out. Throw the hypocritical rascals out, as Jen Gargan used to say. Throw them out. Vote them out. And if they're Republicans, so be it. Vote them out in the primary. Kick the rhinos out. Get some guys in here who actually represent us. The whole R next to your name does not entitle you to vote away our freedoms. Republican or Democrat, you're either with us or you're against us. This is no place for middle ground. We are in danger of civil war, revolution, tyranny, of a police state. This is life or death. These issues are serious. And I am not joking. This is why I've talked for more than an hour. Because I fear for the future of this country. I don't want to see the next few generations of Americans born into a country that doesn't even exist, or if it does exist, it's a shadow of its former self. It is under a police state that is unrecognizable to the founding fathers. I like what Dennis Miller said. He's quite correct. Our ancestors, our forefathers, rebelled, broke away from Britain over a 3-cent tax on a breakfast beverage, and it wasn't even coffee. Somebody else said quite accurately, our forefathers would be shooting today. Well, today we have a different option than shooting, like our forefathers would do. We have the impeachment process, and we have Congress that we can put in place. We have 435 seats that we can fill with true representatives and make this a true people's house. And we can vote out the 1/3 of the Senate that doesn't represent us, that we have the power to vote out. It would still be the other 2/3, but I think we can manage them under the right circumstances if they feel the heat. If they feel the disgust, the revulsion, and the discontent of the people. And in closing, I would like to remind the feds, the ones who are trying to censor us, the ones who are trying to control us, the ones who are trying to bully us into submission. I would like them to remember the words of Edmund Burke. Think, if you will, reflect, if you will, how you are to govern a people who think they ought to be free and think they are not. Your scheme yields no revenue. It yields nothing but discontent, disorder, and disobedience, and such is the state of America that after wading up to your eyes in blood, you can only end where just where you began. That is, to tax where no revenue is to be found. That is the question you must consider. The ones who want to take away our freedom, that's the question I address to you. That is the thing I would ask you to reflect upon. I've already spoken directly to the rest of us. Now I'm speaking directly to you. Reflect on that matter as proposed by Edmund Burke. Reflect on that issue. I think you'll see that if you use your brain, that you can either lead, follow, or get out of the way. We're going to take this country back. You're either with us or against us. We're going to take this country back. It's ours. It belongs to us, not to you. You're temporary custodians, and you have violated that trust. You have breached your contract with the American people. Let me quote something to you. You may have forgotten or chosen to forget, but it's from a little something called the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles, and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence indeed would dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly all experience has shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security.